Good day. President Donald Trump is back in Washington after a trip to Scotland, returning with what the administration is calling a major breakthrough on international trade. While in Turnberry, the president announced a significant new trade agreement with the European Union, reached alongside EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. The deal marks a substantial de-escalation in trade tensions. Under the new terms, the United States will impose a 15% tariff on imported goods from the 27-nation bloc. This is a sharp reduction from the 30% tariff the administration had previously threatened to impose on both the EU and Mexico, a move that had stoked fears of a wider trade war. The August 1st deadline for those tariffs was fast approaching, making this deal a timely development. In return for the lower tariff rate, the European Union has made substantial commitments. President von der Leyen announced that Europe will purchase $150 billion worth of U.S. energy and will make an additional $600 billion in other American investments. She framed the agreement as a necessary correction, stating, "It is about rebalancing. We have a surplus, and the United States has a deficit, and we have to rebalance it." Before the talks, President Trump had assessed the chances of a deal at just 50-50, citing unresolved disputes over the European car market and access for U.S. agricultural goods. This new agreement appears to have bridged that gap, averting levies that would have followed a 50% tariff on Brazilian copper and a 35% tariff on Canadian goods. The economic impact of this trade deal will be a key factor in another major decision facing Washington this week. Today, the Federal Reserve's Federal Open Market Committee begins its two-day meeting to discuss the nation's monetary policy. The central question is whether to adjust the federal funds target rate. President Trump has been engaged in a highly public pressure campaign, urging Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell to slash interest rates to as low as 1% to further stimulate economic growth. The president, who appointed Powell in 2017, has argued that higher rates have cost the U.S. economy hundreds of billions of dollars. Chairman Powell, however, has maintained a cautious, wait-and-see approach. He has held the central bank's key borrowing rate steady in a range of 4.25 to 4.5%, in part to assess the economic effects of the president's ongoing trade negotiations. With a major EU deal now on the table, the committee's calculus may have changed, and all eyes will be on their announcement tomorrow. While in Europe, the president's focus wasn't solely on trade. Speaking alongside British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, President Trump also issued a stark warning regarding the war in Ukraine. He expressed his deep disappointment with Russian President Vladimir Putin over continued airstrikes on Ukrainian cities, specifically mentioning attacks that killed civilians. As a result, the president announced he is dramatically shortening a 50-day deadline he had previously given Russia to agree to a peace deal. He stated, "I am going to make a new deadline of about 10 or 12 days from today." This move significantly escalates the pressure on Moscow to come to the negotiating table in good faith. While the White House juggles these major international and economic issues, lawmakers on Capitol Hill are bracing for a contentious domestic battle with a critical deadline of their own. The federal government's fiscal year ends on September 30th, and with the August recess looming, Congress has just 14 legislative days to pass a funding package and avert a shutdown. The task is complicated by razor-thin Republican majorities in both the House and Senate, and a deep internal division is already emerging over the best path forward. The primary point of contention is the use of a stopgap funding measure known as a continuing resolution, or CR. Some conservative members of the House Freedom Caucus, including Chairman Andy Harris, are suggesting they could support a full-year CR. Their argument is that freezing spending at current levels, amid 2.7% inflation, would amount to a real dollar cut in the size of government. However, that idea is being met with fierce resistance from defense hawks and more mainstream Republicans. One GOP lawmaker, speaking anonymously, called the idea absolutely ridiculous, arguing that a full-year CR would destroy our defense by locking in funding levels set under the previous Biden administration and preventing new military programs from starting. This has created a three-way split. You have the conservatives who want a full-year CR, the defense hawks who want new appropriations bills, and a third group of pragmatists who believe a short-term CR is the only likely way to avoid a shutdown and buy more time for negotiations. Complicating matters further, a small but vocal group of lawmakers, including Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, has vowed to oppose any form of CR, calling it totally unacceptable. Over in the Senate, there is little appetite for any CR. Senators like Mike Rounds and Lisa Murkowski are pushing to complete the full, regular appropriations process, something Congress hasn't accomplished on time in many years. The Senate has made more progress, advancing 6 of its 12 funding bills, while the House has only passed 2, highlighting the difficult path ahead to find a consensus before October 1st. And looking beyond the immediate legislative and economic calendar, the judicial branch is preparing to tackle a slate of its own divisive issues this fall. The Supreme Court has announced several major cases it will hear when its next term begins in October, touching on some of the country's most sensitive social and political topics. Following its high-profile ruling last month on gender procedures for minors, the court will delve back into transgender issues. It has agreed to hear 2 cases challenging state laws that ban biological males from competing in women's and girls' sports. The court will also weigh a First Amendment case from New Jersey that sits at the intersection of free speech and abortion rights. The case questions whether the state can force pro-life pregnancy centers to disclose their private donor information. Finally, the justices will take up a trio of significant election law cases. These cases will examine the constitutionality of campaign spending limits, the complex rules governing the use of race in redistricting, and the highly contentious question of whether ballots that are received after Election Day can legally be counted. The outcomes of these cases could have profound implications for American society and politics for years to come.